My colleague Ray LeBove and I wrote a few years back an article on strategies and tactics to implement public policy changes. And basically, the purpose of this piece that we wrote together was to provide folks with some guidance on developing a strategy and relevant tactics needed to successfully implement your strategy for seeking legislative action in the California legislature. Now, as you might surmise, there are a number of aspects of a policy advocacy strategy that have to be put together and developed. And these include things like identifying your issue and your goals, determining the relevant decision making and makers, identifying those who can influence that decision maker or makers. Also, you need to identify opposition and likely obstacles to reaching your policy goals. You want to determine your own organization strengths and weaknesses, and of course, the strengths and weaknesses of the opposition. Then you have to decide on the key messages as well as individual tactics that you're going to use in order to advance your public policy changes that you're proposing. So the first step that we identified is the specific issue that you want to address in your advocacy efforts. And this issue should be of particular and direct importance to your organization. Your goal has to demonstrate support or evidence, and hopefully your goal is going to be readily achievable. You want to start your advocacy strategy planning by developing a detailed statement of the problem that you're going to address, along with your proposed solution. Once you've identified this problem, you've got to look at the policy, fiscal, and political implications so that you can help determine the goals to achieve. It may make sense to develop several goals and compare and contrast these different goals and decide which one you're actually going to pursue. When you're identifying your advocacy goals, it's really important to describe the change that you desire, the action or actions that need to be taken, the governmental entities that will have a role in this public policy change, the likely timeline needed to achieve these changes, and of course, your goals, as well as your desired deadlines to achieve them. I think it's also important to develop the data and the evidence that'll be necessary to achieve your advocacy goals. Next, we identified that you want to identify the decision makers, those who have the ability to influence the ultimate achievable of your policy goal. And of course, also identify those who can influence those decision makers. Now, some of these influencers on the decision makers may be within your own organization, but some of them or all of them may be outside of your organization. The list that you compile of influencers will help you develop your plan and tactics for advocacy work, as well as the messages that you'll need to develop and utilize in your advocacy. Now, at this point in the process, you'll want to determine the key decision makers' interests as well as their understanding of your issue and their likely position. Your advocacy efforts may need to include enhancing the awareness of these decision makers, as well as their understanding of the issues. You also have to determine whether these folks are going to support, oppose, or be neutral on your proposal. And you'll also want to examine the opposition, and as I indicated before, the obstacles that you'll likely face in achieving your policy goal. Now, some individuals or different groups may oppose because they have a competing goal to achieve. Others may oppose because they lack sufficient information to fully understand the issue being addressed. And some groups may just prefer holding to the status quo. We also think that you have to assess what we call the intensity, the power of your opposition, and to gauge their influence. Your level of engagement, for example, with the opposition is often going to depend upon that level of opposition, the intensity that they have, and their ability, the opposition's ability to influence those same decision makers. Now, if it's not possible to address all the opposition concerns through amendments, um, then you may have to better understand the opposition's perspective and what strategies or tactics will be needed to be employed in order to overcome that opposition. You may be involved in coalition building on your own or developing some, strategic partnerships to hopefully eliminate or at least outweigh some of the opposition's impact. At the same time that you're developing those coalitions and those partnerships, you should also appreciate your organizations, both their assets and their shortcomings. For example, what types of skills or expertise or other resources are currently available with your own organization or that of your coalition, particularly versus those of the opposition. It'd be obviously a valuable asset if you have multiple influencers who can impact decision makers. We both think that you're more often likely to be successful in pursuing your public policy goals when you can bring together a group of those who are similarly interested rather than trying something just on your own. And once you identify these potential advocacy partners, then you need to determine how your organization is going to work with these other groups. Again, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the different groups. Do you have an identified leader? Can you divvy up the work amongst the group? What are the different downsides of working with other organizations? And then you got to turn to your advocacy tactics. What activities are you going to employ in order to achieve your public policy goals? And don't forget, this is the time to develop some easy to understand messages. Obviously, you want to make a compelling case to support your public policy goals. And your key message points in your advocacy documents have to be concise and persuasive. Those who read your materials should be able to discern readily what the issue is and what the proposed solution is, and why they should care about it and all. And then finally, who's your messenger? Who's going to deliver one or more of these messages? In our view, the message or your messages is those who deliver them can often be as important or even more important than the messages themselves. So really having effective messengers will probably be the greatest influence on potential decision makers. So be sure to have a very credible messenger who can help influence or impact those decision makers. Now, don't forget that circumstances can change during the course of your advocacy campaign. And so you may need to adjust your goals as well as your strategies and your strategies and tactics in your advocacy as you proceed through the legislative process.